Well, my name's Dave Bunnell. As I said earlier, I was a fire ecology and wildlife staff officer here on the forest for 10 years. I spent 10 years working in and around Alaska and forests in and around the Lolo and the Nez Perce. Then I got a chance to come to the Flathead and be the fire staff officer, which for me was my life's goal. And the 10 years that I spent here remain the most important and the most consequential of my career. And after I was here on the Flathead, I went to the national office, and as I said, I'm in my official uniform. This says National Headquarters. I got my beanie on, so I want to make sure that you're being addressed by the best I have and what I can remember. I am obviously the oldest guy here. At 39, things have been tough in this program. It wears on you. This program started, of course, on the basis of the Wilderness Act, which was passed in 1964. Through the 7 or 8 years after that, to 1972, the Forest Service and the National Park Service were trying to interpret what it meant really. The Forest Service was led by what's referred to in most of the literature as the Whitecap Five. They are the founders of this program within the United States Forest Service. Bob Much, Orville Daniels, Bud Moore, Dave Aldrich, and Orville Daniels. Those are the five. Within that, Bob Much was the most influential. He, in my mind, is the father of this program. He took more shit than anybody could ever imagine and survived it. You have no idea how important it was to have someone of his stature with the other four beside him be able to buck the fire control regime that managed and directed the Forest Service. This was such an outlandish proposal to allow natural process of fire to burn in wilderness that it just absolutely exceeded the culture within our agency to accept that as being acceptable. So in 1972, they were able to have their first prescribed natural fire in wilderness in the Whitecap drainage. They had another fire in 73, the Fitz Creek fire, which had an escape element to it, which brought a lot of attention onto the program. And from 72 to 81, only the Selway Bitterroot, that complex had the prescribed natural fire program. In 81, Norman Cameron tells me, I have it as 83, we'll have to have another visit over Black Velvet Reserve on what the right date is, but Black Velvet Reserve, for those of you who weren't in the Kill the Buffalo table last night, the Black Velvet Reserve went down before George Dickel went down, I'm just saying. But anyways, in 81, the Scapegoat Wilderness in the complex are the only one that had an approved prescribed natural fire plan, and the first PNF in this complex was managed in 1981 or 1983. Doesn't really make any difference, Norm. And it was a significant fire. It was 250 acres. 250 acres. At the time, an extremely significant fire. Remembering that in that time frame, a 5,000 or 10,000 acre fire in timber was essentially unheard of. If you look at some of the maps produced in this display from 1930 to 1980 in the Bob Marshall Wilderness Complex, there's hardly a speck of fire activity. When I came to the forest in 85, there was less than 1,000 acres that had burned in the Bob Marshall in that 50-year period. Less than 1,000 acres. Anyways, I want to tell you about some of the old-time stuff. So we had the Cigarette Creek fire in 81. In 1985, I became the fire staff officer here on the Flathead. We had a brand new forest supervisor. We had a brand new Region 1 fire director, a knuckle dragon, Region 5 oriented fire suppressionist. I mean, that's the way it was. And so, you know, I was a kid, I was 18, 19 years old then or so, and Everybody was new, and we had this new program. 1985 was a cyclic year. 1961, the first major fire on the Piet National Forest. First fire, the Sleeping Child Fire, over 5,000 acres in timber. 1967, the Sundance Fire in North Idaho, 67,000 acres. 67,000 acres, and had an intensity that melted the bridge, the steel bridge over the Pack River. The most consequential fire in this country since 1918. 1973, the most number of ignitions in Region 1. 1979, the most acres ever burned in Region 1 since 1910. 1985, the highest fire indices in June that had ever been recorded. And the Charlotte Peak fire ignited on June 21st at 7,200 feet. How many times are we going to have an ignition in June at 7,000 feet in the Bob Marshall? Hardly ever. So we have a new forest supervisor, we have a new regional director, we have a new fire staff, none of us know anything, and we have this plan. And the plan says we can potentially consider this as a prescribed natural fire. It's June, which means July, August, and September are yet to come. So we make our play, we read the book, we have a very small plan, and I make the recommendation to the forest supervisor. The forest super makes a recommendation to the region immediately denies it. So we say, how do we backdoor this guy? We're committed. We know that this is important. It could be a precedent-setting fire for the program. We're thinking about it from the forest, but as we get into this, we find our support in Orville Daniels, who was the forest supervisor on the Bitterroot to 1972 and is now the forest supervisor on the Lolo. And he and the new forest supervisor on the Flathead get together, and they convince the regional forester, John Mumma, to override the recommendation of the regional director. If you don't think that's something, try it yourself. In '85, we had the Charlotte Peak fire, which became one of the most precedent-setting fires in the program history because it was the first major fire in timber in the region in the prescribed natural fire program. It was 5,200 and some acres. We had so much to learn from that. Richie Lasco was the FMO here. He was a recently anointed FBO. He had his own little personal TI-59 that he did his fire calculations on. We all of a sudden had a fire that we had to manage people on. We had people running up and down the trail wanting to go fishing and stuff, and they were in our way because the fire was coming down Charlotte Peak. And it so happened that some of those people were was a writer for the Smithsonian magazine. And he wrote a really good article about the fire the next year, and there's a copy of that article in the archives here. But some things that we learned about that, and I made some notes when I was finishing off the last of the Black Velvet Reserve last night, and we had the highest ERC levels to date at that time in 1985. And if you got the dates 61, 67, 73, 79, 85, we were on an absolute dead for sure 6-year cycle, and 85 was going to be the biggest. And so as we look back, and it's important that you recognize that you can't see what's coming unless you're real sure what happened before. And that's one of the things that Charlotte Peak started to teach us in the program. 85 was a monumental year because 85 never happened. August the 2nd, we put a RAW station on Spud Peak to monitor the weather situations around Charlotte Peak because it had already made 2 1,200-acre runs in a single day. And everybody, including the Washington office, was flying in to the airstrip right here at Spotted Bear to find out what the hell we were doing. And we didn't even have a team on it. We had me, Dave Owens, the ranger here, we're right there. Dave Owens' baby boy is sitting right there. This was a big deal, and we learned a lot of things. We learned that we needed long-term fire behavior analysis, because Richie Lasko, sitting on a log with his TI-59, says this fire could potentially be 500 acres. And that was the best the indices and the fire behavior information we had at the time could predict. We exceeded that in the first week. So from then on, we were scrambling. It's the first time we needed to make a plan to manage people in and around this fire, because the main line trail was going right below it. And there was a camp at Holbrook. We had an outfitter camp. What are we going to do about that? But Chef, your camp's probably going to go away. What do you mean it's going to go away? You know, I got all kinds of stuff stashed in little buckets all around here. I don't want to lose that. On and on and on. So we became precedent setting with this fire, because it became the basis for developing what was okay and what was not okay in managing these fires. We needed to develop a plan to manage the public. We needed to find out what was okay and what was not okay, and that became the basis of the development of the maximum manageable area, the MMA. Because people like Jim Mann, who was the regional director, that got blindsided by this deal, the fire suppression community was then, and I will suggest continues to be, looking for ways to find you at fault. You needed to draw a line around this fire, what you were going to be able to successfully manage. And when that was exceeded, they were going to come in and take it over and suppress it. So that was the basis of what we had to do to define what was okay and what was not okay with this prescribed natural fire. Prescribed natural fire in itself, how much more definitive a term could we ever have? I mean, we had to go eventually to wildland fire use, and now we have something else that we can't even say correctly 2 out of 3 times. And you know, all these things are very confusing to the public. And I mean, if we can't figure it out, how the hell do we expect them to figure it out? In 1987, I want to tell you that I experienced the best day of my professional career. In 1987, on September the 5th, I flew out of Kalispell, headed for Redding, California, for the siege of California. And as I flew away, we had a prescribed natural fire at Shaw Creek. We had a confined containment fire in Damnation Creek, and we were responding to a fire, initially attacking it at Swan Lake with our BD crew and 2 engines. And that leads me to this concept. In 1982, the Forest Service, through a bunch of people, including Bob Much and 2 or 3 other people, Orville Daniels was involved, we changed our focus from fire control to a new concept called fire management. Fire management at the time was another erosion of the fire control ethic. We were going to manage fires in various ways rather than control them all. So as I flew away to go to this monumental 2-month stay in Northern California that was really awesome, I flew away from a forest that was managing fire in various ways for multiple resource benefits and for fire safety. Was one of the best days of my career. So as we go from fire management from 85 to 88, we were strengthening our program. The other element that Charlotte Peak developed was a need to evaluate risk. Risk to the public, risk to the resource, risk to our fire people on the ground. And what are we going to do about this fire really? What if we had to take an action? Well, we had no idea what we might do and how we might finance that, because our program in the region was financed for $100,000 out of the regional office. And the scum from the Selway Bitterroot kept having fires earlier than we did, and they were taking all the money. So if we didn't have money in the kitty when we had our opportunity to have a fire, we had to put it out. Thanks a lot, Stuart. So Charlotte Peak, as I said, was a June fire, and we got the jump on them. We got all the money. We never spent a dime of it. We never spent a dime of it, because we didn't need to. We had local money, and we didn't do anything except use our own people. There was no team. There was no need for a team. There was no evaluation of the need of a team. You just had another fire that you handled locally. That worked well for about 3 years until 1988 came. And in 1988, about halfway through the year, there was a hell of a lot of ruckus on the Lewis and Clark about a fire, and a big deal on the Lolo about a fire, the Canyon Creek fire and the Gates Park fire. And in 1988, Norman Camrood and Brad McBratney and Tim Love were handling an 18,000 acre fire that had been going for about a month. And it had burned to the wilderness boundary at least once, and maybe was preparing to go for a second time. And I was in Kalispell, acting smart and being really cool and not doing much yet because the Red Bench fire hadn't started. And so they called me, and I came over to look this fire over because I'd been looking. My friend Jerry Williams had asked me to look at this Canyon Creek fire, and so I dropped in on the Lewis and Clark to look at Gates Park, and I left a month and a half later. In 1988 is a monumental year for fire management as well as this prescribed natural fire program. It was the first year that 40 to 60-year-old lodgepole, which had been known to be a barrier to fire spread, was blown through at any number of times. It was the first time in Yellowstone National Park that we were not able as an agency to overwhelm a fire by sheer numbers and force of people and equipment. It was the first time our fire control effort had been defeated, and it was defeated on national television. It became an international incident. It's the first time we ever had these big, long trucks with these little things on top of them beaming our success and failures across the country, and because it was Yellowstone National Park, across the world. In 1988, our research, our fire spread rates, our fire models, the old H model, everything was essentially defeated. Everything. And as smart and as experienced as we felt that we were, remembering that in the first 10 or 15 years of most of our careers, every fire we went to basically waited for us to get there to put it out. A fire of 10,000 acres in timber was essentially unheard of. And within 2 decades, a 10,000 acre fire in timber would be just another spot fire off one of these major runs. And most of the major fires, once the indices got to the average and to the 90 percentile, we had very little chance of effectively initially attacking them. In fire regime groups 1, 2, and 3 and condition class 3 fuel components, it was over before we got there. So we were left to deal with what was left. So in '94, which is near the end of my run here, we had a big season. We partnered with the Park Service. I ran into a great big guy, big bearded, ugly guy, Tom Zimmerman from the Park Service. You know, he acts really smart, but he needed a lot of help in Glacier Park, and he had been up 2 years before I'd met him in some of our fires in the Bob Marshall, and we always handled these things internally. We only had $100,000 to manage the entire program. And I'll tell you, line officers, there's 3 or 4 rangers in here, and I don't know if Deb is still here. She is. If you want to learn how to manage fire, if we were to give, and this was another thing where I told you when I went to the national office, it became totally unsuccessful. This is one of the elements that I fell on my sword. Give the line officer an X amount of dollars to manage fire on their district, their forest, within their region, but mostly the forest and the district. If we were to give this lady right here $2 million a year to manage fire on this district, and what you didn't spend, you kept, how would you manage fire? You would do it very judiciously. We spend more money showing off than we need to. And I recognize the culture, I recognize the need, I recognize the need for jumpers and air tankers and shot crews and the rank and file, and I'm all over it. And there's places we absolutely have to do it. Politically, it's the right thing to do, but my God in heaven, if you want to learn how to manage fire, look how wilderness managers manage fire in these large areas with basically nothing. Remembering in the early years until 1996, you couldn't order a resource for a prescribed natural fire because you didn't have the authority to do so. That money was for suppression. In Gates Park, this is important because, as you all know, relationships with others are everything. When I agreed to take over Gates Park and help Norm and the Lewis and Clark on Gates Park and managing this fire, it was 18,000 acres. It had been there for a month. The first thing I did was go to the regional office and say, I understand that I can't have any jumpers. I can't have retardant. I can't have crews. I understand that. And I got what's left of $100,000 to spend on this fire, and it's probably going to get pretty big. But I'm going to call you periodically because I'm going to need something. I'm going to need it really bad. And here's going to be the deal. Either you're going to give me what I need at the time, or the next call is going to be from the forest supervisor, Dale Gorman, and he's going to request a Type 1 team. So how do you want to play this? And that's exactly what we did. We'd already dropped retardant on Bear Top Lookout. When I needed retardant it again, wasn't available because we had all the planes that we had in the fire around Dave Ponson's. Greg's dad was on a fire out of Helena. We understood that. But when I needed 6 jumpers and 2 miles of blasting, fire line explosive, water gel explosive, we got it. When we needed to have the Bitterroot shot crew to start developing line on the south flank of the fire, because we ended up with a 50,000 acre fire. Our tactical implementation was that our goal was to keep this fire within the wilderness. That's a BLM mosquito, I know it is. Me and the BLM, long story there. But anyway, so you got 50,000 acres, and I can't remember how many miles of perimeter it was, but it was way big. But there's only 2 miles of this perimeter that could potentially defeat our objective of escaping the wilderness and marching down the North Fork and putting the Boparuski on our friends Dick Click. So we had to make our play at Sulphur Creek. And what we needed to do was we needed to have jumpers and waterline explosive. I needed a shot crew to dig in the dirt at night. And we were able to get that done. The point being that much of the tactics that are required to manage large fires that exceed our control capability, you can't and you don't have to eat the whole thing. You have to be able to pick your time and place. And I'll end this with one other major element that we learned from this fire in '88 and for subsequent fires. These fires happen in a certain rhythm. The Gates Park fire, when I got there, was a month old, and it was 18,000 acres. It made 2 significant runs to get to 18,000 acres. When I got there, I didn't have a fire behavior credential anymore, so I went and got one. And I got Rick Carlson from the Plains District to come over and to look at the previous 30 days of weather records. And there were key factors, and I called it all the moons and stars that lined up correctly. What did it take for these 2 runs to practically exceed, to basically come from the Chinese Wall, the Red Shell Creek, clear to the wilderness boundary? Unprecedented runs. Nobody had any sense of what the hell happened when that happened. The rhythm of this fire was predicated on 3 key elements. 3 key elements. Recognizing that this fuel complex, this was a fire regime group 3, in what I refer to now as condition class 3, it had not received a fire in 2 different fire frequency intervals. So it was ripe and ready, and half of it was dead, and you couldn't fall off your horse in Wrong Creek and hit the ground. There was so much debris on the ground, as an example. So the rhythm of this fire was predicated on wind speed, relative humidity, and temperature. When all 3 of those stars lined up, when the temperature got over 90 degrees, relative humidity was less than 20%, and wind speeds were greater than 10 miles an hour by noon, and blew that inversion out of there, this baby was going to roll. The rest of the time, particularly at night, you could do whatever you needed to do and be real comfortable doing so. So the rhythm of these fire movements became a major element of my evaluation of large fire assessments through the next 15 or 20 years. And wherever I was, this held true. Certain key elements were required for these fires to move. I talked about money. I talked about 88. Everyone that I knew, including Bob Mutch, who was in Yellowstone with Dave Ponson and others, myself, everything that we thought we knew and would learn from a fire behavior standpoint and from a management standpoint was changed after 88. It was the year, in my view, that everything changed within the ecosystem. It was, you can argue the political ramifications of climate change all you want. I don't really care. But you cannot argue the effects of the data and the maps and all the experience that all of us in this room have had and what you're going to have in the next 2 decades. We probably haven't seen anything yet. This thing is changing, and that's the way it is. We have to deal with that and respond to that. In '94, we had a major situation, July 6, 1994, on Storm King Mountain, Glenwood Springs, Colorado. For those of you who are younger people that don't know, Storm King Mountain was a major loss for shot crews and jumpers, primarily from Region 1 and also a couple of kids from Region 2. I happened to be there at the time and was the Forest Service person there and responsible for handling the aftermath of that. Key to that was that major event, loss of life, 13 people. Federal agencies are like the pendulum in a grandfather clock. They move very slowly and very methodically, but when something happens, that pendulum comes clear out of the side of the clock and everything stops. Everything stops. There must be some policy issue. How did this happen? On and on and on. That pendulum starts going back and forth, crashing back and forth until there's a major policy change. The policy change occurred in 1996. The terminology changed. Wildland fire, which is a great term, and wildland fire use became the new terminology from prescribed natural fire. Well, there was such a turmoil between the agencies as what was okay and what was not okay regarding policy. The policy was difficult to interpret. So I was tasked in 1998 to represent the Forest Service, and Tom Zimmerman represented all the interior agencies because we couldn't agree, the 5 of us, the 5 agencies couldn't agree on how to interpret this policy. So somebody had to jump up and down and say, this is how it's going to be interpreted. So Tom had that task to interpret it for the interior agencies, and I was tasked to do it for the Forest Service. So we came out with the implementation guide, the National Wildland Fire Policy, Prescribed Fire Wildland Fire Policy Implementations Reference Guide, and that basically gave us an opportunity to define the elements of wildland fire use. We developed the protocol for implementation and basically said, in a large degree and to a quantitative element, this is what's okay, this is what's not okay, and this is how you do it. And I believe that at that time, it was the first time that we had developed a document between the 5 agencies that basically gave the field specific direction on how to quantify their program elements. So with that, I want to tell you that my 10 years actively managing the program remains the highlight of my career. I feel better about my 10 years here and what was accomplished with our group than anything I've ever done. The other thing I want to say is I told you I was unsuccessful and managing to get the agency to look at different ways of implementing funding to the field for fire suppression or fire management. I also feel that the most important thing I tried to do and was unsuccessful at the national level, and where's Frankie? Frankie, this is for you. Yeah, if you want to do something important, if you want to do something helpful, and I was not successful in doing so, is establish a fire education program within the Forest Service. Our public can't possibly accept all of the nuances of the program and have any way to understand the ecological needs and long-term benefits and accept the short-term consequences of the program from smoke and disruption of being able to do what they wanted to do in a certain small period of time. They can't possibly understand us if they don't know the potential of this program and the long-term benefits based on the short-term inconvenience to their lifestyle. So I tried any number of ways. I was unsuccessful. If you think about us as a collective group of agencies, we're very poor at talking to our public. The Park Service is the only one that has success because that's part of their mandate is education. They've got signs and people trained in interpreting what all this means to them, and we don't do that, and we need to, because without the support of the public, we're eventually not going to be able to do as well as we need to do within this program now. Anyway, I'll introduce George Weldon. He's 39 years old. He's been in this program for most of his career, and this is basically all that's left of him. So if you want to, if you want to stick your nose into this game, you need to be prepared because you're basically going to be by yourself most of the time, and you won't have the support at upper levels that other people have in other program elements. The program is extremely strong now because of we had older people get it started, but the George Weldons and the Steve Wirtz and the Deb Mucklows and Stuart Hoyts and a half a dozen others, there haven't been many of us. I can count on both hands in 30 years the people that have been influential in this program nationally. Half of them are Parkies, so I don't count them. But, George, take us to the end of it.
First of all, congratulations to y'all for having a map like this. It just does not get any better than that. When you think about the Forest Service lands, there's nothing like it in the world. I mean, there is nothing like it. So to have the opportunity to participate in the management of National Forest System lands, I've always considered a great honor to be able to do. And to work in the prescribed natural fire program, wildland fire use, managing for multiple objectives, or whatever the hell it's supposed to be called, is a really neat deal. And I got to tell a little story about the Spotted Bear Ranger District. Norm and I went up to Spotted Bear Lookout to do some radio work, and we were looking at the two fires that we've been talking about, Bear Creek and Trail Creek. And so Norm and I were coming back down the trail, and we were all pissed off about it because we figured, okay, here's 90,000 acres. They probably brought in a Type 1 team. No disrespect, Greg, but and spent $20 million and trashed the country and da-da-da-da-da. So we were all pouting. And then we saw Seth, and Seth told us about what the Spotted Bear Ranger District did. And I tell you what, it just does not get any better than that. And I would encourage y'all to figure out how to have more of those types of events with a Type 3 organization to manage these long duration events. Because when you're looking at managing a long duration events, having the right resource at the right time, at the right place is critical. And these Type 3 organizations can really be effective in terms of accomplishing that. The couple things Bunnell left out that I'll talk about, he left out a lot of shit, but the couple that I want to talk to you about to make sure you're aware of is the scrutiny that these individuals had in terms of getting the prescribed natural fire program going. It's one thing to get beat up by the public. It's one thing to be beat up by outside influences, but to be beat up internally and externally at the same time, you got to be a little bold to survive that. And if you look at the people that really got the program going, like Norm, Steve, Brad, Buns, and others, Stu, there's certain characteristics that they had that I think made them successful. Number one is they're stubborn as hell. You know, I mean, you got a Norwegian, you got Irishmen, you know, that kind of stuff. And their personalities are such that they can take the heat, so to speak. The other thing is they cared about the land, and they figured if they were doing what was right for the land, they were doing right. And all the other stuff was background noise, and they could deal with it. And the other thing they were good about is they really didn't care much about their career. They were more interested in and passionate about getting the things that they were interested in and accomplishing that. I gotta look at my notes from last night.
George Dickel notes. You want my glasses?
To go on, to hit one of Buns' points about information and education. We always look for the help at the national level, the regional level, and the forest level to help us in terms of information and education with the public on the fire program. And that never seems to happen for obvious reasons. I mean, Buns couldn't do it. You know, I mean, he doesn't look like much now, but in his day, you know, he was a force to be dealt with. And if he couldn't get it done at the national level, then the chances of that occurring, from my perspective, are fairly small. So I think what we need to do as a unit is consider getting that information and education program at the field level. If it doesn't happen at the national, regional, forest level, we have to make it happen at the field level. And that's maybe taking away some of our line diggers and investing in education and information that we can have for our wilderness rangers, our trail crews, our information folks, frontliners, to make sure everybody that passes through this country has good information in terms of what's going on from a fire management perspective and the role of fire in fire-dependent ecosystems. The other thing that I would want to mention, and I'll close because again, Buns didn't leave us much time, is the challenges that implementing this program are similar today in terms of the support at the regional and national level. I think as we move this program forward, don't expect support from the region and national levels. It's never happened to this point. You know, Buns talked about the National Fire Director. He had a conversation at a meeting with Joe Cruz, who was the National Fire Director, and he had a face-to-face, nose-to-nose conversation about how funds were going to be used in the future, and he was very disrespectful.
I was not.
Very disrespectful to the people above him. And that's another thing to think about, and what Bun's always taught me and Norm taught me is just because people above you are dumb doesn't mean you have to be. And there, so as we move, the other question that I've always struggled with, and maybe we can discuss it later, is again the fire management program in wilderness is about wilderness, and the fire program wilderness you can think of as one of the many benefits of wilderness is it functions as a laboratory. And there's been an excellent laboratory in terms of how to manage fire. If you look at how the risk assessment for fires was accomplished, it was first done in the Wilderness Fire Program. If you look at how to manage long duration events, it was first developed in the Wilderness Fire Program. So the Wilderness Fire Program has been an excellent laboratory in terms of how to manage fire. And hopefully that it can be extrapolated to other areas outside of wilderness. Putting fires out in fire-dependent ecosystems is a plan for failure. And we all know that. The science has supported that. Our experience has supported it. And it's where we need to make sure that we continue expanding this program in the future. So I really appreciate the opportunity to be involved in the success of your program, because again, there's nothing like it. There's not a better resource management program in the agency than the Wilderness Fire Program. And it's because of all your efforts and what you've done to accomplish that. Norm, Steve, Brad,